Welcome. In this video, I will address colloquial language, how to identify it, and some alternatives to using more standard constructions, commonly referred to as formal constructions, so that you earn higher grades in your academic papers. Let's get started. I'll use a Microsoft PowerPoint presentation to help me keep on track. And while I don't think it's necessary to always write in a formal tone, most of your academic papers will require a formal tone. You will be occasionally asked to write narrative essays, creative works, and these can have other tones, including colloquial tone, but for the most part, your research papers, your fact-based papers will be presented with a formal tone. So understanding what colloquial language is and how to identify it in your own drafts can help you improve the grades that you earn on your academic papers. So, what is colloquial language? I know it when I see it, I know it when I hear it, but I had a difficult time creating a definition for it and trying to explain it to a student who had challenged me last week. The student said to me, he said, "Dr. Murphy, you've told me in multiple papers to not use colloquial language. How do I know when I'm using it?" And honestly, I didn't have a good answer for him at the moment. I gave him a pat answer of, well, you recognize colloquial language as being different from formal language. And then he says, well, how do I know what's what? And I said, well, you have to read more. And that's not really a good answer. So I'm going to do my best to try to explain what colloquial language is, how to identify it, and then alternatives for recomposing statements using a formal tone. So I looked at the literature, and there were multiple authors who made the distinction between literary language and colloquial language, one of which is Claxon from 2010. But I didn't find a good definition of what is literary language. So I kind of entered a rabbit hole, saw that it was making a turn, and that that portion of the tunnel was blocked. So I think of colloquial language as being casual, such as the language that's used in informal discourse between or among people who share the same foundational language, such as 2 English speakers, or 3 German speakers, or 4 French speakers. Colloquial language typically contains current and possibly ephemeral, meaning these are not timeless words. These are words that have temporarily entered the lexicon of conversation. So these are current vocabulary, but these can include jargon, abbreviations, and metaphors that have reference to popular culture. You may think of memes as being a form of colloquialisms. In trying to help my student identify colloquial language in their writing, the student could look for cliches such as, "It is what it is," "Time will tell," "By the end of the day," or another common one that pops up in students who write to me, "In today's society," Well, when is today, and which society are you making reference to? There are many societies around the world. Also, idioms such as a drop in the ocean or cut to the chase, which I particularly like. I like the idiom cut to the chase because it makes me think of the chase scenes from old movies, Keystone Cop movies. Let's just get to the exciting part. And filler words such as very, so, even. Now, it's not that these words cannot ever be used, but they shouldn't be used if they're unnecessary or if they lead to possible hyperbole, unnecessary exaggeration in one's writing. Colloquial abbreviations can also be a problem, such as homophonic abbreviations. WANA, which is an oral abbreviation of want to. Gonna, going to. Yeah, as a reference to agreement, meaning yes. Thanks, rather than thank you. Also, and I know this is not homophonic, but kid as a reference to a human child. Now, it's okay to refer to a young goat as a kid, but it's notably informal to refer to a human child as a kid. And one of my pet peeves in email messages and in messages, written discourse from students attending my online courses, students will often end the message with regards rather than best regards. And best regards itself is an abbreviation from earlier American language, but regards, it just sticks in my craw and it bothers me every time I see a closing of a message that begins with regards. Now, jargon is colloquial, but jargon is a precise vocabulary or a syntax, the way a sentence is formed, that is common to a profession or a technical specialty. And this term jargon is well addressed in the linguistic literature. I cited a source, Hudson, from 1978. Hudson offered an example, catachresis. Well, okay, I know what catachresis is, but I wouldn't expect many people who haven't studied linguistics to understand what that word means without really thinking about it and maybe trying to determine the etymology and the meaning of the word from its constituents. But anyway, catachresis is a grammarian's identification of a word that's used in the wrong sense, using the word for in place of a word that has the correct meaning. Now, jargon can be pretentious also. It can be used by one who wishes to set themselves up at a higher station compared to the people with whom they are communicating. And jargon is sometimes used by, and again, I'm taking this from Hudson, intellectually inferior people. Okay. I think to me, that smacks of being a little bit snobbish, a little pretentious itself. But people who are attempting to convince the audience of their importance, that, or maybe that the speaker of jargon is using those jargon terms specifically to try to convince the audience that they know more than they are really comfortable understanding. And the principal problem with jargon is that it can be mystifying to the receiver. Now, this is true in both oral discourse and in written work, because the jargon doesn't clearly convey the intention unless the receiver has knowledge of the same specialty from which the jargon had been taken. And slang, slang is a particular type of colloquial verbiage. Slang is used to emphasize membership within a group. It's used by friendship groups or by people who know one another well. And slang can be considered socially inappropriate, possibly even rude, when it is read by people who are not members of that in-group from which the slang was taken. The slang is less likely to be perceived as rude when spoken, but in writing, where there's no body language, no intonation, no change in volume, the slang can come across as a little bit sharp, a little bit rude. And slang has had a long history of being repudiated in American English, or by writers of American English. All the way back, I found Walt Whitman addressed it in 1885. Another form of colloquial construction is run-ons. Now, while run-on constructions are pretty common during oral discourse, we can pause while we're speaking and then continue our thought and move on to a new topic and use our body language to guide the listener to understanding our message. But it's really difficult to understand when it's read. So, I advise my students that standard grammar and punctuation add information that aids in understanding the message that's attempted to be conveyed. So in writing, where we can use clear punctuation and we have time to rewrite our sentences so that they are grammatically accurate, the use of correct grammar and accurate punctuation helps the reader to understand the message. Now, grammar exists in oral discourse, but punctuation is more difficult to convey. I can end a sentence but with a bit of uptalk. I can raise the frequency of my speech, the pitch of my speech, to indicate a question, such as, "Are you going to the market?" But it's kind of difficult to identify a semicolon, a comma, maybe even an exclamation mark in just oral discourse. But those punctuation marks are available to us in written work. So, therefore, I think the lingua franca, the language that we use commonly in our oral discourse, is less standardized than the language that we use in standard American English writing. And that's okay, because in oral discourse, as I'm doing now, as I talk to you, I can use some body language. I can change the volume of my speech. I can change the pace of my speech. And I can change intonation and pitch. If I were more experienced as a instructor of theatrics, I'd probably have access to more jargon related to oral presentations. Okay, did you get the joke? That was an inside joke related to a prior slide. Another common problem in colloquial communication is a lack of clear antecedents. Now, an antecedent is something that comes before and makes reference to or clarifies something that is now present, such as pronouns. June gave the paper to her. In writing, it's unclear who is her. So, in other words, to whom was the paper given? But in oral discourse, in face-to-face conversation, it's possible to say, June gave the paper to her, and then point to someone. And now it's clear that it's that person that has been visually identified is the receiver of the paper. So, in oral discourse, the clarity of the antecedents of pronouns is less important. But in distance communication, such as over the telephone or in an auditory-only recording, these antecedents do have to be clearly identified, just as they would be in written work. In general, I tell students to not use modifiers unless absolutely necessary, particularly adjectives, adverbs, and to always avoid hyperbole in their formal assignments. So, the student who had asked me this question about identifying colloquialisms had used the term big corporations in a paper. Well, what does big mean? Are you talking physical size, number of employees, number of locations in which the corporation operates? So we could change big corporations to corporations with more than 5,000 employees. By adding that additional specificity, we've removed the need for the unclear, non-specific modifier. And hyperbolic statements sometimes pop up in student writing, such as, social media offers limitless possibilities. Well, I don't even know that that's factually true. It may be, but I'm not convinced. But it is probably accurate to say social media offers multiple possibilities, maybe 2, 3, 100, or 1,000 possibilities, but not limitless. What does limitless really mean? Is it how many possibilities there are? Or does limitless mean possibilities that have any, this is going to get weird. Are they possibilities that have any possibility of being almost anything? So what does limitless mean? Or we could rewrite that sentence as, companies may use social media to increase their reach into well-focused markets. Notice that I've been able to avoid the hyperbole by making my statements more specific, more carefully and precisely wording them. So, you will be graded on your rhetorical awareness, not just in your rhetoric, not just in your language classes, but in most of your academic courses, particularly as an upperclassman. So, use vocabulary, syntax, and grammar that are appropriate for your situation. So, academic papers generally require more formality and attention to standard American English constructions than do narrative essays or email messages or text messages. Technically, they're called SMS, short message service messages. And you may find as you look back on the assignments that you've received over multiple years at college, you'll notice that narrative essays are commonly assigned in freshman English courses, but not very infrequently are they assigned in later classes unless the class is a creative writing class. And that's because in the beginning, we want to encourage students to write. So we let them write about what they already know and to use first-person perspective and to explain their personal opinions of a given circumstance. Later on, we're asking the students to avoid presenting their own opinions and instead present arguments that have claims that are well defended by expert data. It's that latter form of writing, that more what we might call traditional academic writing, that requires a greater degree of formality. And as German noted on a webpage from the Writing Commons site, your professors will evaluate whether you are writing in a manner appropriate for the situation. Are you writing in a disinterested, dispassionate manner in an upper division course when narrative writing is possibly inappropriate? So, to get back to the beginning, when my student asks me, how do I recognize, or how does he recognize colloquial language? I've got to admit to you, I don't have a nice, simple rule or even a practice, because I know of no comprehensive list of colloquial constructions that are used in American English. So therefore, I recommend developing an awareness of colloquial and formal language through more reading. And I know that's not the answer my student wants to hear. It's probably not the answer you want to hear. But it's through exposure to both colloquial writing and formal writing that one is able to develop the distinction between the two and to create for themselves the ability to transition from colloquial speech into formal speech. And by speech, I don't just mean oral speech. I also mean the language that we use when we're writing. So, what advice do you have to share? I'd really like it if you were able to use this video's commenting feature as a way of helping other students and maybe helping yourself. So please, how do you identify and then replace colloquial language in your academic papers? Tell me down in the comments below. What have you learned about colloquial and formal language types that have helped you improve your academic papers, and I hope earn higher grades for the papers that you work so hard on? What advice do you have for other students? Now, the advice that you can post down in the comments of this video might help other students. And if you were to return to the comments after a period of time, you might find advice from other students that helps you improve the quality of your work. I really hope that you found the information in this video interesting. Avoiding the use of colloquial language in academic papers is a really important skill to learn and to And colloquial language is something to be avoided in almost all academic writing exercises. So until we meet again in a future video, I wish you the absolute best in all of your academic work, and particularly in your ability to avoid the use of colloquial language in your academic papers. Bye for now. Mika, you are a good dog. You know, you really are. But man, do you have big feet. And look at that hair. Oh, we have to trim that. Whoa, and those are some nails. I'm glad you like me and you're not a scratcher. Whew. Yeah, but maybe you need those nails in case you ever come up across a big mean squirrel. Yeah, you're a good dog, you know that? I love you so much. You're a best dog.